there could be a lot of good stuff in a Jill Biden memoir.
Yeah, the first lady might tell us finally whose cocaine it was.
Good evening and welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, May 8th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Philip Wegman. He's our White House reporter. Gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight. Great to have you. We have a new pope. Carl, I have to say, I did not have the Pope from Chicago on my bingo card. Robert Prevost is his name, Cardinal Robert Prevost. He has taken the name Leo the 14th. What we know about him, he is 69 years old. He will be 70 in September. He was born in Chicago, went to Villanova, and then came back to the Chicago Catholic Seminary here on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park, and then was a missionary in Peru and eventually took Peruvian citizenship in 2015. He seemed to have been, from what I saw, Carl, a favorite of Pope Francis, and put him in charge of, brought him to the Vatican and put him in charge of, very powerful position. But again, he was not on the list of folks that, in the run up to the conclave, he seemed like a bit of a long shot.
Well, yes, but in hindsight, he was an obvious choice. Pope Francis, he's an Augustinian. Pope Francis brought him into the Vatican, Tom, as you pointed out, and he also spent most of his time as a priest in South America, as did Pope Francis. He was in Peru, as you mentioned. Pope Francis was from Argentina. He helped vet most of these cardinals who Pope Francis appointed, who were in the conclave. So he picked them, and now they picked him. And I don't mean to say it's an inside deal. I mean to say that they knew him, and he's a person. Leo the 13th, the previous Leo, was known as Leo the Great. This Leo the 14th, I mean, he would be called Leo the Quiet, or maybe Leo the Kind. He's well liked almost universally. And the symbolism of today, Tom, he came out and spoke. They introduced in Latin. We have a new pope, and then when he started speaking in Italian, and then he switched to Spanish. And he spoke Spanish, and many people in the crowd there wept when he did that. He's the first American pope. As you mentioned, when he speaks his native tongue, he'll be speaking English as his native language. That's the first pope in 2,000 years. And what he told the people gathered, he was in St. Peter's Square, is that he said, "I'm an Augustinian priest, but a Christian above all, as well as a bishop." And then he paused and said, "So we can all walk together." It was a very moving and unifying message.
Phil, aside from all the sort of pomp and circumstance, and I know you're not Catholic, but still, it's a pretty, global event. People are watching for the white smoke, but there is, and I hate to direct it this way, but you are a White House reporter. There's a political element to this, right? Donald Trump.
Trump wasn't picked, Tom, if that's what you're getting at.
Snubbed again.
Snubbed again. But he did congratulate the Pope and said he looks forward to seeing him. And I also saw, I believe, that one of now Pope Leo the 14th, one of his last writings in the National Catholic Register was dinging J.D. Vance for something that he had said. So how does the White House, view this new pope and their relationship with him?
We're going to find out a lot more about the new pope. I think the article that you just mentioned, I'm not certain if he wrote it himself or if he was just sharing another writer's thinking, but we'll also find out whether or not the Vatican thinks that retweets are endorsements or not. I mean, certainly some of the Catholics that I've been speaking to, they're all overjoyed. This is a moment of celebration in the Catholic faith, but they see him as a pragmatist, not as liberal as Francis, but certainly not conservative. And we've already seen this new pope be critical of some of the statements from Vice President J.D. Vance. It remains to be seen whether or not that continues, especially as this White House moves quickly on the issues of immigration, as well as other hot button social issues as well. But in the sort of few minutes since this has been announced already, there's just been a lot of joyful reactions. A lot of people making fun of the fact that this new pope is from Chicago. That means that Rome will finally have good pizza. A lot of people, kidding that he's not actually from Chicago. He's from Naperville. It's good to see that even at such a serious moment as this, some of our brothers and sisters in Christ can also have just such a delightful sense of humor.
Well,
Yes.
Tom, you live in Chicago, and the ABC reported it seemed the reporter blurted it out to me that he's a Cubs fan, but he grew up on the South Side, like 100, his parish, which is no longer there. I think it's like 139th Street. I assume he's a White Sox fan. So I guess we have to, get our ace White House reporter on that, because that's actually the story most Chicagoans want to know today.
Could this be the first pope to throw out a first pitch?
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Oh, absolutely. He should.
Listen, the White Sox can use all the help they can get.
Well, yes, Tom, it's true. But if he threw out the ball in any American stadium, the first pitch, the first pope to do that, you would have tens of thousands of Catholic converts overnight. The Church of Baseball would say these people who now worship in the Church of Baseball, who grew up as Catholics and only go on Easter and Christmas, would suddenly flock to their local parish.
They would find religion. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking much more about the new pope, but let's shift gears back closer to home and back to politics. Phil, Donald Trump teased last night that he was announcing this big trade deal with the UK, and it was the headline in all the headlines this morning. And he had a little event in the Oval Office, and Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, is phoned in. And so what do we know about this trade deal? What does it actually accomplish? And what are the details, if any?
The most significant detail is that the United States started with a 10% tariff on Great Britain, and they ended with a 10% tariff on Great Britain. There are some exceptions for things like British cars. There's a quota of 100,000 that are going to be able to avoid the 25% auto tariff. And then there are also some quotas for steel, agricultural goods, so on and so forth. But the reason why all of us were following this trade deal in particular is because it's the first. And obviously there's a special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. But the question was, all right, is this going to be a template for the rest of the world? And in fact, Donald Trump was asked that exact question, and he said no. 10% is pretty low. And so what this means to the other nations that are knocking down the door at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, trying to get their own deal, is that, even if you change absolutely everything, 10% might be as low as you can go.
Carl, look, if you look up our trading partners, right? I think, the 42% of our trade is with three countries, Canada, Mexico, and China. The UK is well down the list. I mean, it's not a lot. I think there was 150 billion is what I read in terms of trade between the two countries in 2024. So this is not one of the big fish that Trump is frying here, but nevertheless, he made a big deal about it because, as Phil said, it is the first.
Well, yeah. And Tom, because of Brexit, you're dealing with the UK separately, but the EU together is one of our biggest trading partners, about the same as Canada and about the same as China. So I think the Europeans are watching this and thinking, all right, well, maybe there's a roadmap for us. But the interesting thing, if Andy was on the show, and he's out this week, which is why you've got the three of us, he would just be really kind of upset about carve outs. He thinks you ought to have he's not a fan of tariffs, but he says, when you have tariffs and then you start having special things like 100,000 British cars, that's swampy. And it kind of is. But this is the Donald Trump that I wouldn't say know and love, because half the country loves him and the other half hates him. But this is the Donald Trump we're familiar with, the guy who likes to get deals. Over the weekend, he said some deeply weird comments about, well, maybe we don't need any deals. I'm not doing this for deals, which begged the question of then why are you doing it? But this is the Donald Trump, the guy who wrote the book called The Art of the Deal, the guy who fancies himself as a great negotiator. And he's got something now he thinks he can live with. And what they want to do now is calm the markets, calm down, frankly, the talking heads in the media who are hyperventilating daily about, the inflationary effects of tariffs, even though they haven't taken effect yet and they're not yet inflationary. I'm going to talk to Bill Galston later in the show and ask Bill about this because he and I were talking earlier. He's a fellow with the Brookings Institution, and he says that you've got these container ships showing up at Los Angeles, the port of Los Angeles and San Pedro and Long Beach, that fewer ships than before, and the ones that are coming don't have many goods on it. And when President Trump was asked about that, he basically said, well, maybe you have to do with less. So suddenly Trump became, a 1970s back to the land liberal, all in support of tariffs because he obviously believes in this approach. But the good news was, of course, 100,000 cars, you can still buy a Jaguar, I guess, without having to pay 25 or 50 or whatever percent.
That's money that's saved for all the maintenance that comes with British cars.
So, Phil, just a minute or so left in the segment, but Trump's teasing all these other great deals. We're in deep negotiations with multiple countries. What is next? And are we going to get some sort of deal with China in particular, or one of these other sort of big trading partners that matter a lot more than all trading partners are not equal. Let's put it that way.
The U.S. trade representative is going to be meeting with his counterpart from China in Switzerland over the weekend. I'm going to be watching that really closely to see if there's any movement there. We've heard a lot about negotiations between the United States and South Korea. Certainly, J.D. Vance's trip to India was supposed to set the stage for an agreement there. But something that I found particularly interesting, not from the cabinet members praising Donald Trump in the Oval Office, because we expect them to do that, but from Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who said over speakerphone that it was Donald Trump and the 11th hour who had new requests, new requirements for this deal. And it was delayed about 45 minutes. We thought that the announcement was going to come at 10 o'clock. Instead, they pushed it back a little bit. What that shows you is that it's Donald Trump himself who is playing an active role in these negotiations. He has a hand in them. He's not just signing off. And so I think whatever individual deals come, they're going to be running through his office, and he's not just going to be rubber stamping them.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, speaking with Carl Cannon, Phil Wegman. We'll be right back after this. We're going to talk about John Fetterman. He's been in the news. We'll discuss. Stick around. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, speaking with Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Phil Wegman, our White House correspondent. So, Phil, let's talk about John Fetterman. He has been in the news recently, and not necessarily in the best way. So you had a piece earlier in the week by Ben Terrace in New York Magazine, and it was titled all by himself, the hidden struggles of John Fetterman, and basically sort of through, a variety of anonymous sources said that he's not doing well mentally. And then you had this very morning, there was a follow-on story by the Associated Press that said Fetterman, quote, raises alarms with outburst at meeting with union officials, according to, again, anonymous sources from the Associated Press. What's going on here with John Fetterman and the leaks that are coming out and the stories that are coming out suggesting that he is maybe not well mentally or struggling?
The cynical take here is that the mental decline of Senator Fetterman on the campaign trail, when progressives liked him, was not an issue. But now that Senator Fetterman has moderated, or at least is more pro-Israel, now his mental decline, alleged mental decline, is fair game. And certainly you see a lot of the same people who were praising him for his resiliency and overcoming this stroke now turning on him. Notably, I think the New York Magazine piece, it provided new details, but it provided new details that seem to have been leaked from a former Fetterman staffer, including some correspondence with one of his doctors. And I found it notable in that story that Ben Terrace noted that one of his primary sources also happened to be one of his friends. So I take this story much more seriously when the Associated Press did a follow-up. They're not just going to rush to print. And I think, though, for folks to, take this more seriously and sort of look past the appearance of potential political opportunism, there's going to need to be some people come out on the record. What do his colleagues think? What do some of his longtime friends think? Instead of, what do anonymous sources who likely have a bone to pick with him think?
Well, Carl, my hot take on this, for what it's worth, was that, the dinging the Associated Press, they went 4 years during the Biden administration without ever writing a headline that said Biden's conduct in private raised alarms. and despite what we now know and what we quite frankly saw with our own eyes at the time, and yet here's the Associated Press coming forward with this raises alarms headline. And if you read the story, apparently Fetterman was in these meetings with union officials, and he was sort of slamming his hands down on the table saying, why is everybody against me? Why does nobody like me? What do you make of this? What is going on here?
If we're voting, and Phil is taking the story somewhat at face value, and Tom is skeptical of it, I'm voting with Tom. Sorry, Philip. This guy had a stroke just during his campaign for Senate, and the press wouldn't write about it. He had a debate in which he, while recovering from the stroke, in which he sounded monosyllabic. He sounded like he belonged in a rehab facility for his stroke. The press thought that was no big deal. He was running for Senate. The Senate race in Pennsylvania was considered perhaps the Senate that hinged on it, the control of the Senate. And then he gradually got better. He still has he's still a quirky person. He wears hoodies and stuff to inaugurations and shorts on the Senate floor. I mean, he's not, but he hasn't changed completely. There's these memes on social media. The conservative Babylon Bee had fun with it. Man has stroke. Decides he's, he recovers from stroke and figures out he's a conservative. Like being liberal is a mental condition in itself. I won't go that far, but I just think he had staff members who quit over Israel. He's been full-throated in support of Israel, which, Phil, when I was your age, every single Democrat on the Senate floor, that's where they would have been. The Democratic Party is, pandering to, in my view, a far left, kind of Marxist contingent who is anti-Israel and borders on, and crosses the borderline into anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish. Fetterman hasn't gone there. He's gone the opposite way. And it seems to me that the antipathy for him within his party is caused by this. And then you start seeing these, these hit pieces. Yeah, you're right, Phil. You can't dismiss what you're hearing out of hand. But the motivations for these stories is important, and the context is important. This guy, nothing he did ever bothered them until he came out in support of Israel. And I'm just really skeptical of it. Tom, I mean,
well, that's the argument that Selena Zito
on this show get to Tom's right, if you will, on media bench, but I kind of will today.
Well, this is almost as rare as an American Pope.
Almost 2,000 years worth. But that is the story that Selena Zito has written, that this is all about his support of Israel, and that's the reason the knives are out for him. Even before that, though, I mean, he said some things that when all the Democrats want to fight Trump, he had made some, he'd said some things to like, look, we need to work with Republicans on this. I'm willing to work with Trump on X, Y, or Z, and said Democrats were off base on some of these issues. So it's maybe not all about Israel, but it certainly seems like that is a big part of what's going on, Phil.
Yeah, and to answer the question that the senator allegedly asked those union members, why don't people like me? It might be because he is taking a different tack than the rest of the Democratic Party. There are some who are just sort of waiting to see what Donald Trump is going to eventually do. You have others like Cory Booker who are saying, no, now is the time to fight to the hilt. With Fetterman, he seems to be sort of moderating, doing something different, agreeing with the administration where he can. And perhaps, again, this might be just the cynical take, but perhaps some of his colleagues in the Democratic Party are saying, all right, well, we're not going to ride to your rescue when you come under such withering attack.
Well, the good news for Fetterman is he just won an election, so he's got a few years before he has to stand before voters or face a primary challenge, perhaps, if that's where this ends up going. Carl, let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about a related subject, which is the anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas protests that once again sprung up on college campuses over the last couple of days, including at Columbia University, where 80 people were arrested for, among other things, defacing the study room in their library. We seem like we're back to square one. What kicked this off? Why is this happening now? And how are the university folks handling it?
Well, they seem to be a little, the administrators seem to be a little less willing to tolerate vandalism than they were a year ago, Tom. At University of Washington, Seattle, a group, Antifa group, they were chanting pro-transgender slogans and and other things. It's a kind of it's a philosophy that eludes me, to be honest with you, but also pro-Gaza propaganda, and they did $1 million worth of damage in a lab, and there were 30 arrests there. The protests are now, it's not a mass movement, and it hasn't been. It's a very vocal and very loud and very militant group, but a minority group, and they seem to want the United States to. They want their college administrators to disinvest from Israel. They want protest against the Trump administration. They want pro-transgender politics to be front and center, and so it's an odd coalition. There was a video I saw on YouTube of some Antifa person, two of them dressed in all black with their faces covered, real cowards, harassing an elderly couple for going to a lecture, and I guess it's a woman. You couldn't tell for sure, but it all, like I say, head to toe in black, telling this old woman she hopes she dies and falls and breaks a hip. And what this couple had done that was so heinous, they'd gone to hear a lecture by a person who who's skeptical of transgender, of biological men competing in sports. You're down to that. You're down to a very fringe group of people, and to bring it back to our sort of comfort zone and the issues we know about, the Democrats need to start speaking out against this. This is uncivilized behavior and fringe behavior, and most Democrats are opposed to it. And so you'd not like to see some Democratic elected officials, the ones who keep saying we have to fight Trump, fight Trump, fight Trump. Okay, yeah, work against Trump, but get your own house in order too, and tell these people, tell the American people that these people don't speak for you and you won't tolerate it.
Phil, I saw Claire Shipman, who's the acting president of Columbia University, released a video message saying, look, these aren't our values. Vandalism's not acceptable. And so we'll see. But at the same time yesterday in the House Education Workforce Committee, you had 3 more college presidents. I think it was, Haverford, Cal Poly, and somebody else. Forgive me for forgetting. But sitting before, getting grilled by Republicans again, including Elise Stefanik. We saw the first installment of this movie last year, where it was Harvard and MIT and Penn, and I think most of those folks ended up losing their jobs. 2 of the 3 of them are gone. Yeah, 2 of the 3 of them are gone. What happened in the House committee, and are these presidents has there been a change in tone? Do they get it now, or is it kind of more of the same?
No one was more disappointed that Elise Stefanik had her nomination to be the U.S. ambassador to the UN pulled than college administrators, especially the ones who are going to get it called up before Congress to testify. I think that you have some college administrators saying, look, we've changed. We're for peaceful protest and peaceful expression, but we're not going to tolerate this type of vandalism and intimidation. Others, certainly, Harvard doesn't seem to be as eager to police their own. But what I'm really curious by is when we eventually know the names of those who are arrested at Columbia, my suspicion is that the majority of those students who were arrested there, if in fact they are students from that campus, were probably American citizens, because people respond to incentives. And the message has gone out over the last 3-4 months. This administration, they're willing to deport folks here on student visas who aren't protesting peacefully and who are engaged in, antisocial behavior. So, I think that this is the second wave, but also now things have changed with the current administration who's saying we're not going to put up with this.
Yeah. All right. We are going to take another quick break. Stick around. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Phil Wegman, our White House reporter. So, gentlemen, and Phil, you were on the show yesterday, and we talked about Joe Biden because he gave his first interview to the BBC, and lo and behold, it came out late last night or early this morning that he and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, would be on The View, which they were. And we had talked to Phil about, why he chose that first outlet. Well, now we know, he didn't sit down with, when he came to the United States, didn't sit down with NBC or CBS or ABC or even MSNBC. He went to the friendliest confines, I think, possible. And that is the ladies of The View on ABC. He said a couple of things of note. One, he said that, he felt like he would have beaten Donald Trump. He said he took responsibility for the loss to Donald Trump. He also said he thought Donald Trump has had the worst first 100 days of any president in American history. And, there was some back and forth with Jill Biden as well. What'd you make of this? And what does it tell us? I mean, I guess Joe Biden is back and he's going to insert himself in our politics. Can we expect more of this?
We probably can. He's going to be trying to shape his image in the next couple of weeks and months. What I'm surprised by, though, is on the one hand, you have the incredible arrogance of Joe Biden, and he always has been this way, especially after he did something that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton thought that he couldn't do. Beat Donald Trump. I think that for the rest of his days, he'll be of the opinion that he could have won. And yet, when he has this hubris and ego, where does he go? To the most softball of interviews, The View. He's not going to 60 Minutes or 2020, really sitting there for a grilling. Instead, he's teeing off. I think that this would have been a much different interview if perhaps Meghan McCain was still on that show. Instead, this was a walk in the park. What I was most interested by, though, was not what Biden himself had to say. What stuck out to me was Dr. Jill Biden denying that she kept him in a cocoon, because this is also her legacy at risk. And there are a lot more questions that are going to be asked about what she did during those 4 years to shield him from the press and the public.
Carl, did you watch the show, or did you watch some clips?
I watched this morning. I didn't see it live, but I sort of found myself agreeing with The Independent, the British newspaper, which sort of summarized it with a headline that said, President Biden and Dr. Jill still show they still don't get it. And this idea that you can say on the one hand, I could have beaten him, and I wasn't surprised by Kamala Harris losing, which he said. Phil talks about hubris. It's more than that. It's cluelessness. It's not knowing what happened. This guy was forced to step aside by the Democratic Party. every elder in the Democratic Party, including Barack Obama, who elevated him to the vice presidency, tried to nudge him out, precisely because they could see from the polling that he was going to lose to Trump and lose badly. Now, they didn't want an open primary. They thought that would be more divisive. There was only 109 days left in the campaign by the time they finally talked Biden into quitting. But, her numbers went up. I mean, this thing, Biden was trailing Trump in all this, in all the polls and in places, he was trailing him in places where Democrats can't lose to Republicans in all the swing states by greater margins than Trump won. So, Kamala Harris made it closer. That's to me, that's an objective kind of take on that. Now, you don't expect him to maybe have that exact same take, but to not even acknowledge what had happened, which is that people had lost faith in his cognitive ability, and to not, and to your point, both of you made this point. He didn't, if you're going to be if Dr. Jill's going to be there, the question you want to ask her, and she didn't get this question on The View, is, are you sitting there with a straight face, Dr. Jill, and telling us that you saw something on whatever it was, June 27th, that you had never seen before? You had never seen that. It was a sudden thing. And they're going to say, well, he was tired. And, he was tired from a trip that had ended weeks before.
Say he was sick.
Yeah.
He said that.
But on the one thing, I'll give Biden credit for. I'll give him his due on one thing. For him to say that Trump has had the worst 100 days in any president, that's pretty mild compared to the stuff Donald Trump has been going around saying about Biden. He says he constantly says Biden was the worst president in American history, and he brings it up apropos of nothing. He'll say, this invasion would have never happened. Nothing would have happened. The world would have been perfect had Biden not ever been elected president. So, in this sense, it's certainly fair comment for him to kick Trump a little bit when he's down, and by down I mean down in the polls a little bit.
Phil, we got just a couple minutes left, and I did see you mentioned Dr. Jill Biden. There was a story in the Daily Mail today saying that they're looking at a $30 million book advance for the Bidens, and apparently Joe's already working on his memoir. But it's her memoir that people really want to know, because apparently she kept a diary while she was in the White House, and people want to know, what she saw behind the scenes. To Carl's point, I'm not saying she would reveal that necessarily.
To be honest, Tom, every word.
I'm not saying that, but she could very well dish on a lot of those prominent Democrats that Carl just mentioned, who tried to push Biden out and were successful. Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi,
Sure.
all of that. And we know she hates Kamala Harris, and Joe, and has held a grudge against her for ever since, Kamala Harris said Joe Biden was a racist. So there could be a lot of good stuff in a Jill Biden memoir.
The first lady might tell us finally whose cocaine it was. Maybe she'll really give us the goods. Look, the Obamas, they got paid by Netflix. First lady Trump currently has her deal with Amazon for a docuseries. Now, Dr. Jill Biden, she's getting her paycheck as well. This is not unusual. I am very curious, though, to see what is going to be in that memoir. Like, how guarded will she be? And just how credible is she? Because again, this is someone who insisted that nothing was going wrong, everything was fine. And to, again, return to Cannon's point here, a big part of restoring their credibility would be dealing with objective reality. When Biden says that he could have beaten Donald Trump, let's remember, Biden never led Trump in the Real Clear Politics average in 2024. I believe Kamala Harris did. So their version of events, I think it's likely going to be an alternate reality, but hopefully we'll get some answers to questions.
All right, we've got to leave it there. We're going to take another quick break. When we get back, Carl's going to talk to Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution, so stick around and don't go away.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics. I'm talking now with senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, William Galston. Those of us who've known him since the Clinton administration call him Bill Galston, but his byline is William A. Galston. He had an interesting piece that we ran about the polling, Bill, bottom line, I won't make you regurgitate all the numbers because I want people to go to the site and read about it. But
Sure.
bottom line seems to be, even though we're just barely past the 3 months mark in the Trump presidency, a majority or a plurality, a working majority of American voters now think this is Donald Trump's economy, not Joe Biden's economy.
That is exactly right, Carl. And I have to say, as someone who's been looking at polling numbers now for decades, I am really surprised at how quickly the turnover from Biden to Trump occurred. Now, what got me interested in this was that when the negative GDP numbers came out from the Commerce Department for the first quarter of this year, Trump said, well, it's Biden's economy. And for good measure, he said, and the next quarter will still be Biden's economy. And then he went on Meet the Press and said, in a very pithy statement, everything that's good about the economy is Trump's economy, and everything that's bad is Biden's economy. Okay, so I asked myself a question. Donald Trump, I think, believes what he said, but do the American people agree? And as I dug a little bit, I found half a dozen surveys that had been conducted in the past month, all reaching the same conclusion. No, the American people don't agree, for better or for worse. They think that Donald Trump is significantly more responsible for the current state of the economy than Joe Biden is. And, as I said, it happened very quickly.
Well, that's right. But let's talk about some of those reasons. So now we're getting out of the numbers and into interpretation. But I've been covering this. You've been working in politics. I've been covering for a very long time.
Right.
Donald Trump acted during the transition like he was already president, and in some ways that was refreshing because we have this transition period that's probably too long for the modern world. And it made some sense for him to do that. Joe Biden didn't run for re-election. There was a widespread view even within the Democratic Party that he wasn't up to the rigors of a second term. So there was some logic to it, but it didn't give the honeymoon period got started before the wedding, so to speak.
That's a great line.
Right? So he doesn't get, in a sense, the benefit of the lag time that you'd expect. Biden ran the economy for 4 years, the theory goes. You and I both know presidents get too much credit and too much blame for the economy. But leaving that aside, he's 3 months in. So in voters' minds, it's like Trump's been running the economy for 4, 5, 6 months. That's sort of what, as I read your piece, that's what I thought was one likely explanation.
Frankly, that one hadn't occurred to me, but it's pretty good. But I offered another one at the end of my piece, namely, Trump had acted so boldly and dramatically on tariffs that people sort of drew a double line under the Biden administration and said, okay, we're living in a different world now. And it's a world that was created by the decision of one man. And, and for better or for worse, the consequences of this bold stroke are his and not anyone else's. And that's not a crazy position for an ordinary citizen to take. As a matter of fact, it's not a crazy position, period, because the consequences of the new tariff regime have overwhelmed everything else going on in the economy put together.
Well, so far, the effects of these tariffs haven't actually been felt yet. But everybody says they're about to. Something's going to happen. Now, the numbers right now look. If you were just looking at this in a vacuum and you hadn't paid attention to a word Donald Trump said since Inauguration Day, you'd think, employment's strong, inflation's crept up just a tiny bit, but things are going okay. But what is happening is two things. First of all, the president has said that inflation has gone down, which is not exactly right. I mean, it's not right. But this tariff talk has dominated not just the news, but it's dominated Donald Trump's own inner circle. I mean, he talks about it constantly. This is not so much a case of, the press blowing something out of proportion. It's all Trump seems to want to talk about. So it's on the minds of people. And we did polling ourselves, our own real clear opinion research. People are worried about these tariffs. They don't a plurality of Americans do not think it will increase employment, and a majority of Americans think it might increase prices. So even though the effects aren't being felt yet, people are bracing for it, aren't they?
They sure are, and with good reason. I paid great attention to an announcement a couple of days ago coming out of the Port of Los Angeles to the effect that ships coming into port were down 44%. We're mainly talking about, Chinese and other East Asian
container ships, mostly we're talking about.
Container ships. And not only is the number of ships down, but the ships are much less full than they used to be. And you have major retailers across the country warning of shortages, within the next 6 weeks to 2 months. And that cannot be good news for the economy. It certainly can't be good news for prices, because what happens when shortages emerge? every second week student in Econ 101 knows the answer to that question. So people, I think, are right to be worried. And I think it's inevitable, even if the president were to turn off his entire tariff regime tomorrow, there would still be a bumpy few months ahead of us. And the longer he persists in this, the longer and bumpier I think the road is going to be. And that's certainly what the American people think. You somewhat understated, Americans' concern about prices, because in a number of polls that I looked at, the ratio of people thinking that tariffs would make prices go up to those who thought they would go down is between 5 and 10 to 1.
Yeah.
In one poll, it's 75%.
Yeah.
So, now, of course, there's no guarantee that 75% of the people can't be wrong, but I'm putting my money with the people on this one.
You're listening to Bill Galston, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and who was not a weak student, econ weak student, as he mentioned. He was a very good student and longtime Democrat and writer. He writes for the Brookings Institution. He's written columns for us. I first met Bill when he was in the Clinton administration. He's well known in Washington, on both sides of the aisle, as a straight shooter and a person who's not hyper partisan, and it doesn't let his partisanship get the best of him. So, Bill, let me ask you a question, though. So the majority of Americans think this is Trump's economy. Yeah, I get that. But there seems to be a little bit, we don't want to have amnesia here. Presidents blame their predecessors for the economy routinely until they turn around. And, Joe Biden blamed Trump's economy basically throughout his presidency. I think, the Democrats did this with Jimmy Carter till he was getting awards for being the best ex-president. So after he was out of office, Barack Obama did this. He blamed, his predecessor. They all do this. Somehow it hasn't, with Trump, it hasn't stuck. And I'm wondering, is that a reflection of our hyper-partisan environment? In other words, you ask any Democrat a poll question that reflects badly on Trump, you're going to get that answer. Is this part of the equation here?
It may be part of the equation, but the question I asked was a different question, namely, do the people believe him? Because I think when Ronald Reagan blamed Jimmy Carter, for the stagflation, people believed it, and with, I'd say, considerable justification. And so what intrigues me now is not only, the minority, and indeed a dwindling minority, if you look at the trends, who believe him, but the number of people in his own party. A majority of people in his own party believe that tariffs are going to make prices go up. So that is, this is beyond partisanship at this point.
Yeah, okay, I get that. And the other thing is, maybe you've thought about this. Donald Trump he prepared us for this. This was not a bait and switch thing. He said during the campaign that tariff was his favorite word in the English language. He's talked about tariffs, best I can tell, back to when he was going on Larry King Live before, 40 years ago, before anybody thought him as a politician. the American people aren't buying the tariffs thing. What is there anything that's going to shake the president's faith in this?
Well, let me begin by agreeing with you emphatically. I've been arguing with people for nearly a decade in my own party and, with Republicans as well, who claim that Trump is just this empty vessel, searching for popularity and approval and love and has no convictions. I've never believed that. He's had a handful of core convictions that he's brought with him for the past 4 decades at least. And the belief in the evils of globalization, the belief that our trading partners are quote unquote ripping us off, taking advantage of us, and the belief that a strong tariff regime is the best way of turning that around. This is essential Trump, and I think he will give up his belief in tariffs only when forced to by circumstances, economic or political, that are so dire that he will yield ground grudgingly under pressure. But this is an article of faith with him. It's not a random or peripheral thought. It is absolutely central to his worldview.
I think that's right. And I have to tell you, I didn't think I'd live long enough to see a Republican president say, when asked about would tariffs cause shortages, to channel Ralph Nader or Jerry Brown from the 1970s and say, yeah, but probably less is more. We can do with less consumerism.
He even had a Marie
15 seconds left, Bill. Last word.
Yeah. Okay. He had a remarkable Marie Antoinette moment. When speaking to the mothers and children of America, he told them to make do with fewer dolls. Now, if I were trying to design a campaign spot for the Democrats next year, I could not improve on that.
Fewer dolls. The movie Chucky did that. Now Trump's trying to do it. That's going to do it for us today. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, and you've been listening to Bill Galston and I discuss tariffs. Bill, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.